Hello, my name is Brian Hopkins. I'm an inspiring special education teacher at Wisconsin Lutheran College. Here's my educational philosophy. I agree with the educational philosophy of progressivism. Progressivism organizes school around the concerns, curiosities, and the real-world experiences of students. In progressivism, the teacher facilitates learning by helping the students formulate meaningful questions, and the teacher should also devise strategies to answer those questions directly. I believe answers should be discovered by the student, not told to them through a book or by a teacher. According to pragmatism, the way to determine if an idea has merit is simple: test it. If the idea works in the real world, then it has merit. An educational reformer who I idolize is John Dewey. Dewey stated that people learn best through social interaction in the real world. Dewey also believed that students facing an ever-changing world should master the scientific method. Number 1, be aware of the problem. Number 2, define the problem. Number 3, propose various hypotheses to solve it. And number 4, examine the consequences of each hypothesis in the light of previous experience. And the last, test the solution. This should be applied to all students, which brings me to my next point: culture and gender differences in American education. I believe both males and females should be educated by the same learning curriculum. The story of women's struggle for education opportunity may be just as hard as that of African Americans and other minorities in the United States. For nearly 2 centuries, women were not allowed to attend schools in America. In fact, the education of America's girls was so limited, fewer than 1/3 of colonial women in America could sign their own name. I believe all legal United States citizens should be educated by the same philosophy as well. In 1986, Plessy v. Ferguson tore America apart. This Supreme Court decision stated the doctrine separate but equal was okay. Separate but equal intentionally legalized separate railroad passenger cars for black and white Americans. But this also carried over and justified for legal segregation in the school systems. This lasted for more than a half a century in many states. Separate but equal was not equal, though. In 1906, Mississippi spent $5.02 for each white child and just $1.10 for each black child. In 1924, the state spent $1 million to transport whites to long distances to school. No money was spent for the black Americans. Luckily, political momentum for civil rights reform grew when the participation of African Americans in World War II grew. In 1954, the Supreme Court's decision of the case Brown v. the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, was the schools must not segregate. The court ruled unanimously in the field of public education that the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. This was a huge victory for all minorities, including women and disabled children. I believe schools must also include students with disabilities. Many disparate attitudes were common in our society for years, and this resulted in inadequate education programs for millions of exceptional children. Before the Revolutionary War, the most that was offered to exceptional children was protective care in asylums. These asylums made little effort to help children develop. Then, in the early 1800s, attempts were made to educate the idiotic and insane children of America. The years following World War II brought renewed hope and promise. Special education was reformed. Special education has broken away from the isolation and institutionalization that was found in the 19th century and has moved to mainstreaming exceptional children as much as possible in a typical school setting. Starting in the 1970s, Congress passed several landmark laws for special education. In 1975, Public Law 94-142, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, established the right of all students with disabilities to receive a free and appropriate public education. This law was later replaced and expanded in 1991 by IDEA, or Individuals with a Disability Education Act. There are 6 fundamental provisions to IDEA that I believe firmly in. Number 1, zero rejection. No child with a disability may be rejected. Number 2, non-discriminatory education. This means that all students with disabilities should be fairly assessed so they can be protected from inappropriate classification and tracking in schools. Number 3, appropriate education. These children have the right to an education involving an accurate diagnosis of their needs and programs that are key to meet these needs. Number 4, a least restrictive environment. This means that students with disabilities should be educated most closely resembling to their school environment while meeting their special education needs. This is where mainstreaming and inclusion come into play. Number 5, procedural due process. This upholds the right of students with disabilities to protest the school's decision about their education. And lastly, number 6, an IEP, or an individualized education plan. This allows students with disabilities to have their education defined on an individual basis. If we continue to revise and implement new laws that help students with disabilities, women, African Americans, and other minorities learn best, I believe America will continue to make significant strides in education. Ultimately, my philosophy is simple. America should educate all students, regardless of their gender, age, intellectual disability, race, religion, at a high quality through real-world experiences connected with progressivism. If I had to sum that all up, I would say it can be best described by saying, never settle. Americans shouldn't settle for low test scores. We need to be number 1 in the world. Americans shouldn't settle for children falling through the cracks and getting tracked through their education. Americans shouldn't settle for children not going to college. Americans shouldn't settle for children who are financially less fortunate to receive less of an education than a child who is more financially fortunate. America shouldn't settle for teachers who don't love and care for their students. And America shouldn't settle for an educational system that doesn't benefit all the students. And most importantly, America shouldn't settle for children not reaching their dreams that they've had for so long. We should encourage these students to be all they can be. As educators, it is our job to provide these children of America with the proper tools and necessities required to reach their goals and dreams. My educational philosophy is simple. It is the same as my philosophy in life. Never settle.